Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. It's time to review Respect. This is the Aretha Franklin biopic directed by Liesl Tommy and starring Jennifer Hudson as Aretha Franklin. And it is a music biopic by the numbers. You know, after Bohemian Rhapsody's success, we expect that there's going to be lots of these, at least one a year probably. I don't know if this is like a totally new thing, but also it didn't have the same energy as Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocket Man, and it wasn't trying to go for that because Aretha Franklin's music just doesn't lend itself to that. There was a lot more drama. I would compare it more to US vs. Billie Holiday. Although even that one tried to have like more song sequences. There was like a surprising amount of fat they just did not cut out for some reason. This thing was almost 2 hours and 30 minutes. And it felt like it needed to be a solid hour and a half. I don't know what it is with these running times for these musical biopics, but they just feel like they have to put every detail of their life in there. They have to show every single song in its entire capacity. And because Bohemian Rhapsody made a lot of money and that was long, they feel they can get away with it. It just doesn't feel like there's any purpose for you putting me through that much of your movie if it's not doing that much. You're just getting right into the thick of it. It seems like. Yeah, I think this movie just suffers from bullet point biography film syndrome, where it's like, we touched on what happened to her when she was a child. We touched on these sources of abuse that she suffered. We touched on how she got famous and when it happened, and we show it to you. That's what you want in a biopic, right? Like, we gave you the information and we put it on screen. But it's missing so much that could have made it more. This movie just feels like the plainest version of itself. It just really is a movie that lacks creativity and at a unique angle. And by the end of this movie, which is 2.5 hours, I didn't feel like I knew who Aretha Franklin was, like, at her core. It seemed like the only unique trait about Aretha Franklin was that she was an incredible singer just naturally, and everything else is just like she's a little ping pong ball, and, the movie's interested in all the things that are bouncing her around. And we get very little of, like, how her mind works that makes it special, because obviously Aretha Franklin is a very special artist. I felt like the writers had the level of interest that a 7th grader would if they were assigned a research project on Aretha Franklin. It felt so incredibly uninspired for somebody who was so inspiring that they couldn't come up with an angle here. There is no angle for how to tell this story, for how to approach the Aretha Franklin biopic that is remotely interesting. Everything is just so derivative. The main takeaway of the film was like, she has to find her own voice, and then she sort of comes into like her Christianity. While those things maybe could be interesting if they're fleshed out, they weren't fleshed out. And so they just left you feeling like that's sort of an empty shell, like her finding her voice and creativity. On that note, what is her voice? She finds it. The Christianity. But what's the Christianity was the answer to that. That's not a good answer. I didn't like the answer either, but I'm just saying. A central question about any movie that's celebrating a beloved figure should be able to answer, what does this character find beautiful about the world? Especially with artists. The movie's just more interested in like the things that hurt her along the way. It's very, very interested in her first like boyfriend, husband person, like the Marlon Wayans character. It's very interested. It's too interested in her pain. And a lot of times it's this pain that's caused by men around her. And obviously the movie is about how Aretha Franklin needs to find her voice within a world where men are pushing her around. But it still felt like it gave too much of a voice in this movie to the men, and it wasn't specific enough about Aretha Franklin's journey. Aretha Franklin clearly cared a lot about the civil rights movement, and they show that in a couple of points, but didn't seem to affect her personally in the movie. This felt like they glossed over it like intentionally. I would imagine this factors so heavily into your experience of everything in this country at this time, and it felt like it was a small part of her in the film. And she sort of pays like dividends to her race and to like the civil rights movement, but it didn't really feel earned, and didn't feel like that was coming from a place of like, that's who she is and she really cares about it. They almost made the character seem like that's just something that they
did because it was just a good thing to do at the time.
Also, another thing that was just completely like overlooked about Aretha Franklin's life that could have been something is that she has 4 children in this movie. I have no clue if she even likes them. Like, I don't know what she has to do with them.
I bet you there's so many things like that that are interesting that the movie just doesn't care to engage with. You know, I have yet to do this, but if I just spend like 5 minutes on Wikipedia, I'm sure I could read several things that make me more intrigued about Aretha Franklin than I found in this whole movie.
It painted with such broad strokes, like just the need to span her entire life.
They may as well have shown her like coming out of the womb. Why do you have to start with a child every single time where like, oh, we have to recognize that at age 5 they were extremely gifted and talented? Like, I know that at the very fucking least, this movie is going to be about somebody who is very talented and very gifted. Like, I wanted to see in the beginning, like, what was missing from her life or, like, what she desired or what her dreams were when she was 5. Just something outside of the fact that, yes, she is a good singer. Like, the first scene is her displaying her talents in front of other people. This was just obvious. Like, I knew exactly that this was going to be the scene that we get. You didn't even get the opportunity to see her maybe like defy the expectations of other people in the room. It's just like, yeah, she's a great singer and like look at her being a great singer. Like this is who she is. She's a great singer.
The relationship with her mother is important and like there are a couple key events in her childhood
that
I thought were important to touch on.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I liked her relationship with her father and I will say I really liked Forrest Whitaker in the role and he definitely had my attention whenever he was on screen.
Yeah, there are some good supporting performances, and then I guess we can just talk about Jennifer Hudson, in the lead role. I think Jennifer Hudson's very good in this. Obviously, her voice is the main asset here, and it's during, like, the musical sequences where her character, like, really shines the most just because she's expressing a lot of that character's passion. But it's not a performance where I'm like convinced that this was an embodiment of the person. Whereas like in Billie Holiday, for example, I think the movie didn't do a good job showing the depths of that figure, but it was clear that Andra Day was bringing that. I like Jennifer Hudson, but I don't know if she brought another layer to it.
It could be the writing as well. Like, I just never felt like Aretha Franklin jumped out of the screen and became, like, this human being that I was really interested in. I couldn't help but feel that the performance was a little bit flat.
Can Jennifer Hudson get nominated? I mean, I still think she could. Because, I mean, again, it doesn't really matter what I think personally. Maybe they'll just be like, oh, of course, Jennifer Hudson, she played Aretha Franklin. She sang her ass off. She cried a lot. Like, of course.
My impression was that it's clearly an appeal to awards voters just by default. But I do think she might have a hard time. I felt like she didn't transcend the mediocrity of the film overall enough. We also have the obstacle of timing where this film's coming out like before fall festivals. It has to sustain the momentum. I think a lot of the times performances like this will do better if they come out around awards season because especially this movie, like it's forgettable.
I actually didn't see this as like a rousing crowd pleaser of a movie. Like despite the fact that critics were mixed on Bohemian Rhapsody, that movie did have a clear undeniable energy to it where I was like, oh, audiences are going to get riled up by this. I didn't get that out of this movie. I think that if you're a really big Aretha Franklin fan, you'll probably softly like the movie. I don't think it's going to blow anybody away because it doesn't try to blow you away.
It's honestly just too long and too much of a slog to be a crowd pleaser. If this was an hour 30 minutes, I think you could possibly call it that. You could maybe say it's a crowd pleaser, but it is just too long and dull.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to that point in every biopic where there's a moment where she's just randomly like lashing out at people because she's wealthy and here it's time for drugs.
And it just came out of nowhere. Like, yeah. It didn't even make sense with the way it was building up.
And then it just resolves like pretty quickly when she just realizes that like she can like find Jesus or whatever. And it was
it was like vague things about inner demons that literally get solved when she gets back in touch with her Christian roots. And it is no more specific than that.
When the character overcoming all of the problems in the film is just like, she overcame it because she decided to overcome it. It's like, you didn't have anything to begin with. And also just how uncreative all the visual choices are in the movie. All the camera placements, all the editing choices, just meh.
There was one really cool shot where when she was a little girl and she's singing at the church and the camera starts like panning around her and then it goes and you see the audience and they're like slowly getting up and then when it comes back to her, she's older and she's Jennifer Hudson. And I was like, of course, like it wasn't just because this was a cool shot. It was like because you had to do something. You had to figure out a way to show her growing up.
It's just so insistent on not being better. How is this movie so aggressively mediocre?
The whole thing is sort of like goo that just kind of falls through your fingers. And I agree that it's aggressively mediocre. It's not poorly made, it's not poorly acted, but that's actually my least favorite kind of movie because that movie has me checking my watch even more than a movie like Cats. And Cats had a terrible plot, but at least that movie was like fulfilling some sort of pleasure. This movie really didn't do like anything for me, and the longer it went on, the more I felt that way. I would have preferred a movie that was just flat out bad. I have to give this like 2 out of 10. I wish that I did like nearly anything else but watch this movie. I do feel bad giving it like that low, but that's just me being honest about my level of enjoyment. Just a disclaimer, I didn't think I was going to like this going in based on the trailers and based on people's reactions. Like I knew this wasn't the kind of movie that I would like. And I was right. So take that as you will too. Like if you think you are the kind of person to like this movie, then maybe you will like it.
I'm giving it a 4 out of 10.
I'm just kind of tired of these like conveyor belt biopics. Just really, really like tired of it. Level of quality, like it's a 4 out of 10. But because it was so fucking long, I was like, I hated myself at the end of it.
Wow. You okay?
I wanted to leave the theater and I didn't.
They have not done a music biopic as good as Love and Mercy since Love and Mercy. Remember how that one actually really tried to like dig into the psychology of its character? Remember how good Love and Mercy was? Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Do you demand respect?